My name is Emily Parker. I'm 30 years old, and this is the night my family decided I was nothing. I remember the sound first. Clinking glasses, laughter, the kind of warmth that usually fills a family dinner. Except this time, that warmth wasn't for me. It was for my siblings, Daniel and Rachel. We were gathered around the long oak dining table in my parents' house, the same table where I'd spent my childhood spilling juice boxes and sketching ideas in worn-out notebooks. But tonight wasn't about family. Tonight was about betrayal. Daniel cleared his throat dramatically, the way he always did when he wanted attention. "We have big news," he announced, his arm around Rachel as if they were a team against the world. My parents leaned forward, smiling. My mother already had that proud look plastered on her face, as if she knew what was coming. Rachel chimed in, her voice dripping with excitement. "We're launching a new company, Parker Innovations." I froze. Those two words, Parker Innovations, were the name I had scribbled on countless pages, the name I had whispered to myself late at night when I dreamed about finally turning my ideas into reality. I had spent years drafting, designing, and pitching this concept to anyone who would listen. And now, here they were, announcing it like it was their own. I looked around the table, waiting for someone to speak up, to say the obvious, that this was my idea, my dream. But all I saw were nods, smiles, admiration that wasn't directed at me. "Isn't this exciting?" my mother said, clapping her hands together. "Finally, something solid, something respectable." I opened my mouth. "That's my idea. You know that. I've been working on this for years." Daniel rolled his eyes, the way he always did when he wanted to make me feel small. "Emily, please. You've been talking about it, not actually doing anything. Rachel and I decided it was time to bring it to life." "But," I started, my voice cracking. My father's hand slammed the table, rattling the silverware. "Enough, Emily. You've always been the dreamer, the one with no follow-through. Your siblings are finally making something of themselves. Stop embarrassing yourself." The words cut deeper than I expected. Always the dreamer. Always the weak one. I wanted to scream, to throw the truth in their faces, but the room was already against me. My mother leaned in close and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "Don't make a scene. This is their moment." Their moment. With my work. The celebration carried on without me. Glasses of wine were poured. My father raised a toast. To Daniel and Rachel, the future of the Parker legacy. And me? I sat there, staring at my plate, hearing every cheer as a knife twisting deeper. No one defended me. No one even acknowledged me. I was invisible in a room full of the people who were supposed to know me best. Rachel smiled across the table, her victory sharp as glass. "We'll make the family proud, Emily. Don't worry, you'll find something eventually." That was it. The moment I realized I wasn't part of this family anymore, not really. I was the shadow they wanted to forget. I excused myself from the table, my voice calm even though my hands were trembling. I stepped outside into the cold night air, the laughter echoing behind me. My heart was pounding, but somewhere inside that pain, something else sparked, something harder, sharper. Standing there in the dark, I made myself a promise. This betrayal won't break me. It will build me. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to spend another second trying to prove myself to people who had already decided I was worthless. Instead, I would show them. I would take the very dream they tried to steal and turn it into something so powerful they couldn't ignore me. I stared up at the night sky, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt fire in my veins. They thought I was weak. They thought I was finished. But they had just created the strongest version of me they would ever face. And if you're listening to this right now, don't forget to hit subscribe, because what happened next shocked everyone who thought Emily Parker was done. The night my family cut me out, I walked away with nothing. No money, no investors, no support system. All I had were my bruised pride, a few notebooks filled with ideas, and a rage that burned hotter than anything I'd ever felt. For the first time in my life, I was truly alone. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment on the rougher side of town. The paint was peeling, the heating barely worked, and my neighbors fought so loudly through the walls that I learned to fall asleep to the sound of slammed doors. My savings were pitiful, stretched thin over rent and instant noodles. Every night, I stared at my empty fridge and thought about the feast my parents had celebrated at, my siblings drinking wine on the dream they stole. Loneliness became my constant shadow. Without family dinners, without Rachel's chatter or Daniel's arrogance filling the house, silence filled every corner of my life. It was heavy, but inside that silence was room to think, to plan, to learn. I started with the basics. If Daniel and Rachel thought I couldn't build a company, I would prove them wrong. I borrowed old finance books from the library, stacked them on the rickety table in my kitchen, and read until my eyes blurred. Terms like equity, cash flow, and capital structure felt like a foreign language at first, but I forced myself to learn them, one by one. During the day, I worked odd jobs, barista in the mornings, data entry at night, anything that kept the lights on. Every dollar I earned was split 3 ways: rent, food, and savings for my future company. It didn't matter if it was $5 or $50. I treated each one like a soldier in an army I was building against the people who betrayed me. The hardest part wasn't the poverty. It was the doubt. There were nights when I'd collapse on my thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, wondering if my father had been right. Maybe I was the weak one. Maybe I didn't have what it took. Every time that thought crept in, I remembered his voice at the table, "Stop embarrassing yourself," and it lit a fuse in me. His dismissal became my motivation. I refused to stay small. I downloaded free courses, sat in the back of business workshops I could barely afford, and watched successful entrepreneurs talk about risk like it was oxygen. Slowly, the language of money began to make sense. The spreadsheets that once terrified me started to feel like puzzles I could solve. I stopped seeing money as numbers and started seeing it as power, the power to write my own story. One night, while scrolling through forums, I came across a post about bootstrapping, building a business with almost no external funding. The writer described starting with nothing but an idea and determination. It was as if the universe had whispered directly to me, "You don't need them. You never did." So, I built a plan. I wrote down every skill I had: marketing, writing, research, problem solving. Then I looked for problems I could solve with those skills. The first spark came from a small business owner who couldn't figure out how to market online. I offered to help for a tiny fee, less than I deserved, but enough to get my foot in the door. When it worked, that client referred me to another. It was nothing glamorous at first. Just me at my kitchen table, hunched over a second-hand laptop, writing copy and designing social posts. But it was mine. Every invoice I sent, every dollar I earned carried more weight than any allowance my parents ever gave me. Slowly, word spread. Emily Parker, the sister they called weak, the daughter they dismissed, was becoming something they didn't see coming, a builder. Of course, it wasn't smooth. I made mistakes. I lost clients. I underestimated deadlines. Some months, I had to choose between paying my internet bill and eating 3 meals a day. But every failure taught me more than any success ever could. I kept a sticky note on my wall with 5 words. Betrayal gave me my fire. Every time I felt like giving up, I stared at those words until my chest tightened with determination. Within a year, I had a small roster of steady clients. Nothing huge, but enough to cover rent without barista shifts, enough to fill my fridge with real food, enough to let me breathe. More importantly, enough to give me proof that I could build without them. One night, sitting at my table surrounded by papers, I realized something life-changing. I didn't just want to survive without my family. I wanted to thrive so completely that they would choke on the sight of my success. They thought taking my idea would silence me. Instead, it gave me a reason to roar. And I wasn't even close to done. Growth never feels like fireworks when you're in the middle of it. It feels like exhaustion, like staring at a laptop until your eyes sting, like chasing invoices just to pay the bills. That's what my early years looked like, messy, relentless, thankless. I worked from a shaky second-hand desk wedged into the corner of my apartment. My laptop hummed like it might give out any second, and my Wi-Fi dropped so often I sometimes ran to the library just to send files. But piece by piece, client by client, something began to form. The first real breakthrough came unexpectedly. One of my small business clients, a boutique clothing store, so their sales tripled after I ran an online campaign for them. They were stunned. They told everyone who would listen, and soon, other local businesses started reaching out. I remember the night I signed 3 clients in 1 week. I sat on my mattress with contracts spread out like playing cards, laughing until I cried. For the first time, I felt momentum. It wasn't luck. It was mine. But success doesn't erase struggle. There were weeks I thought I'd drown under deadlines. Days I wondered if I'd made a mistake betting everything on myself. Then, I'd hear my father's voice in my head. You've always been the weak one. And suddenly, quitting wasn't an option. With each small victory, I reinvested. I upgraded my laptop. I built a simple website. I started learning not just how to do the work, but how to sell it, scale it, and make it sustainable. My business wasn't just freelance anymore. It was a company in its own right. 2 years in, I hired my first part-time assistant, a college student named Mia. She was young, hungry, and full of ideas. With her help, I could finally focus on strategy instead of drowning in day-to-day tasks. We worked side by side at my kitchen table, the walls plastered with sticky notes, flowcharts, and goals. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building. My name started to circulate beyond the local businesses. A regional magazine featured me in a rising entrepreneurs column. Seeing Emily Parker in print felt surreal. I bought 3 copies, tucked one under my pillow, and mailed another anonymously to my parents' house. I wanted them to see it, to know I existed outside their shadow. But the moment that changed everything came with a single phone call. A mid-sized tech company reached out. They'd heard about my work and wanted me to run their new product launch campaign. It was bigger than anything I'd ever handled. Part of me wanted to say no. I was terrified of failing. But then I thought about Daniel and Rachel, sitting smug at their stolen company, assuming I could never compete. That thought alone made me say yes. For 3 months, I lived and breathed that campaign. I worked through nights, fueled by coffee and sheer willpower. I studied their market, built a strategy no one had tried before, and executed it down to the last detail. The result? A record-breaking launch. The company's CEO sent me flowers with a note that read, "You didn't just meet expectations, you redefined them." That single success opened floodgates. Bigger clients, bigger deals, bigger recognition. Within another year, my company had grown from 1 assistant to a team of 12. We moved into a small office downtown, nothing flashy, but it had glass windows overlooking the city. The first time I walked through those doors, I felt taller, stronger. Emily Parker, the family disgrace, the dreamer with no follow-through, was now CEO of a company pulling in 7 figures. I'll never forget the day I signed my first $1 million contract. I held the pen for a moment, my hands trembling, before writing my name in bold ink. That signature wasn't just a business deal. It was a declaration, a line drawn in history. Every late night, every insult, every lonely meal had led me here. Brick by brick, failure by failure, I had built something my siblings could never steal from me. One evening, standing in my office as the city lights glittered outside, Mia asked, "Do you ever think about your family?" I looked at her, smiled faintly, and said, "Every day. They are the reason I started. And one day, they'll be the reason I finish." Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just about business. This was about revenge. My empire wasn't complete yet, but it was rising. And when it stood tall enough, they'd see it from their crumbling throne. I stayed at the words until they blurred. Carter and Company, the company my siblings had stolen right from under me, the family legacy I was never good enough to inherit. Now it was collapsing. I felt no joy at first, only disbelief. The business my father had spent decades building, the empire my siblings lorded over me, was falling apart. And the world was watching. News outlets detailed corruption, unpaid debts, lawsuits piling up like unpaid bills. Employees leaked stories of chaos, mismanagement, arrogance. The perfect facade my brother Daniel and sister Rachel had built was cracking in public. For days, I followed every article, every report. Each headline was another nail in their coffin. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages from old classmates, colleagues, even distant relatives who remembered how my family had humiliated me. Have you seen this? Wow, karma is real. Yes, karma was very real. But this wasn't just karma. This was poetic justice, because while their empire crumbled, mine had risen higher than I ever imagined. By then, my company wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. We had just closed a multi-million-dollar deal with a global brand. My office buzzed with energy, my team expanding so fast I could barely keep up. Investors were calling me, not the other way around. The contrast was brutal. On one side of the city, Carter and Company's glass headquarters was filled with layoffs, panic meetings, and lawyers. On my side, my team toasted with champagne after hitting record profits. One evening, as I walked out of my building, I saw the reflection of their skyscraper across the skyline. It hit me, their tower of pride was crumbling while mine was climbing higher every day. And the irony? Some of their former employees had already applied to work for me. I even hired a few. They whispered stories about how Daniel screamed in meetings, how Rachel falsified reports to cover up losses. Their downfall wasn't an accident. It was inevitable. Still, I waited. I wanted to see it with my own eyes. That chance came 3 weeks later. I was invited to a private gala for entrepreneurs and CEOs. The kind of event where the city's elite gathered, sipping wine and exchanging deals in whispers. I wore a sleek black dress, my confidence sharper than the heels on my feet. And there they were, Daniel and Rachel. For the first time in years, I saw my siblings up close. But they weren't the powerful, untouchable figures I remembered. They looked smaller. Daniel's tie was crooked, his smile forced. Rachel's eyes darted nervously around the room, as if searching for allies who no longer existed. People whispered as they walked by. Not in admiration, no, in pity, in scorn. The mighty Carters had fallen, and everyone knew it. I approached slowly, my heels echoing against the marble floor. Their eyes flicked to me, and for a second, they froze. Emily Parker, the disgrace, the dropout, the nothing, was standing taller than they were. Emily, Rachel said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We didn't expect to see you here. I'm surprised you showed up, I replied calmly. Given the circumstances. Daniel's jaw tightened. It's temporary. We're restructuring. I let the silence stretch, savoring it. Finally, I leaned closer and whispered, the world doesn't restructure broken empires. It replaces them. I didn't stay long. I didn't need to. The image of their defeated faces was enough to carry with me for years. The next morning, the news broke that Carter and Company had officially filed for bankruptcy. Photos of my siblings leaving the courthouse, heads down, plastered every paper. That night, my team and I celebrated another successful quarter. Glasses clinked, laughter filled the air, and someone asked, Emily, did you see the news about Carter and Company? I smiled. I did. But I didn't gloat. Not yet. Because in my heart, I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the prelude. Their empire had crumbled. But soon, I would show them exactly who had built one in its place. Power shifts silently. One day you're the one begging for scraps, and the next, the same people who pushed you aside are at your door, their pride stripped bare. That day came on a rainy Thursday morning. I was in my office, in the tallest building downtown, when my secretary buzzed me. Emily, your brother and sister are here. They don't have an appointment. For a moment, I just sat there. The words didn't feel real. Daniel and Rachel. My brother and sister. The ones who called me a disgrace, who laughed as they stole my ideas, who told me I'd never amount to anything. And now, they were here. I straightened my jacket, nodded, and said, "Send them in." The door opened slowly, and there they stood, not the powerful siblings who once controlled my family's empire, but hollow shells of themselves. Daniel's expensive suit couldn't hide the exhaustion carved into his face. Rachel's designer heels clicked against the floor, but her eyes refused to meet mine. "Emily," Daniel began, his voice low, almost pleading. "We need to talk." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my legs, studying them the way one studies strangers. "About what?" Rachel swallowed hard. "About saving the company." The words hit the air like broken glass. Saving the company. The same company they stole. The same company they swore I would never be part of. Now, they wanted me to rescue it. I didn't answer immediately. I wanted to let them squirm. And they did. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Look, we made mistakes. But you've built something incredible. Everyone's talking about you, Emily. If you partnered with us, if you stepped in, we could." I cut him off with a raised hand. "No," I said simply. Rachel's head snapped up. "What do you mean, no? Emily, we're family." Family. My voice sharpened, years of buried pain boiling to the surface. "You only remember I'm family when you need something. When I was struggling, when I begged you for a chance, when I was sleeping on a friend's couch, where was family then?" The room went silent except for the sound of the rain against the glass windows. Daniel's shoulders slumped. For the first time, he looked small to me. Weak. I stood, walked around the desk, and stopped just inches from them. My heels echoed like a gavel striking judgment. "You stole my idea. You shut me out. You told me I was worthless." My voice was steady now, each word sharp as a blade. "And now you want me to save you." Rachel's voice cracked. "Emily, please, if the company goes under, we'll lose everything. The Carter name, our father's legacy." I smiled coldly. "The legacy died the day you betrayed me." Daniel tried one last time, his voice breaking. "We're begging you." I let the silence stretch, savoring the weight of it. Then I whispered the words I had carried inside me for years. "I don't save traitors. I replace them." Their faces crumbled. The desperation in their eyes burned itself into my memory. And then I walked back to my desk, sat down, and looked at them as if they were just another failed business proposal. "This meeting is over." They hesitated, as if waiting for me to change my mind. But I didn't. I turned my attention to the papers on my desk, dismissing them without another glance. Eventually, the door clicked shut behind them. And just like that, the cycle was complete. The girl they once called a disgrace now held all the power. The empire they tried to steal was ashes. Mine stood taller than ever. That night, as I looked out at the city lights, I thought about the younger version of myself, the girl who cried in silence, who believed she was nothing because her own family told her so. She was gone. In her place stood a woman who had built an empire from the ground up, a woman who no longer needed validation, a woman who had finally proven that sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming untouchable. And as for my siblings, they learned the hard way what I had always known. I was never the disgrace. They were.